Good morning. Do you ever hear the expression, talking from both sides of your mouth? Well, that's what I have to do here. Welcome to our pre-Pesach discussion about one or two aspects of the Haggadah. The Haggadah is the book that we read on the Seder, at the Seder, on the Seder night, 2 nights of Passover. The word Haggadah comes from the Hebrew biblical term, V'higadata, you shall relate, you shall recount the events to your children. Passover is a time for telling the story. And the Haggadah is one of the most ancient compilations of Jewish literature. It's predated the Talmud even, although it was not put in writing until the Talmud. You find fragments of it preserved in the Talmud. Some other things were added on later. One of the things that were added on later is actually the first paragraph of the Haggadah, which is Lachma, Anya. This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. It then follows with words, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate Passover with us. This year we are here. Next year we will be in the land of Israel. This year we are slaves. Next year we will be free. That's the opening paragraph written in Aramaic. And it's an enigmatic paragraph, and I'm just going to share one insight as to why we say that. We turn to the matzah and we say this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. And then we invite hungry people to come and participate. Isn't that odd? You're sitting at the Seder already, the doors are closed, and you're inviting people. If anyone who you wanted to invite, makes sense to invite them before the Seder, not while you're sitting at the Seder table. You already drank the first cup of wine, and now we're inviting people. So obviously it's not a formal invitation, it's a reference to the fact that we have a need to invite people to our Seder. And I think one of the reasons why we say this paragraph, which by the way is written in Aramaic, which was the language of the general public in those days, not Hebrew, was because it was intended to convey a message to people who are sitting at the Seder. The Seder is about reliving the Exodus, feeling free, feeling like you have no worry in the world. We recline while we drink the wine and eat the matzah as a symbol of an expression of freedom. We drink 4 cups of wine. You don't see slaves drinking 4 cups of wine. It's an expression of freedom. Each cup of wine, another dimension of freedom. Now you can get carried away with the feeling of freedom, especially if you live in a free country, and especially if we don't have to suffer from slavery and persecution as people in the past, Jewish people in the past have had to suffer. You can get carried away with this feeling of slavery, and you won't appreciate the feeling of freedom. You won't appreciate the slavery and the suffering, because it's human nature that if you are hungry and needy, you can feel the hunger and needs of others. If you are satiated, wealthy, have everything you want and everything you need, it's much more difficult for you to appreciate the needs of others. There's a very famous story. I'll just try to butcher it and deliver it as succinctly as I can. There was a very poor man, but he was the most generous person on earth. And a great rabbi came to visit him, and when he saw his hospitality, his kindness, he blessed him with wealth. Well, sure enough, as he was growing in his wealth, so was he growing in his stinginess and his lack of consideration for others. From the time when he became very wealthy, nobody ever stepped over the threshold of his home unless it was a rich business person, unless it was someone dignified, some very important person. He was not the same person. And when the rabbi heard about what his blessing did to a man, he came to his palace, his mansion, and the man was very happy to see his rabbi who came from far away to see him. And the the rabbi said, "Could you take me around and show me everything?" And he showed him very proudly his beautiful mansion. And then he goes to the window, huge window in the living room, and he looks through the window, and there are people walking down the street. So he turns to the host and he says, "Who is that man over there?" "Oh, that's Yankel, the water carrier." What does he do for a living?" "Oh, he carries water. He makes a lot of money." "No, he's a pauper." "And who's that?" "That's," and he points to another person who's poor and destitute. And he goes through many different people walking down the street, pointing out the degree of poverty to which they were subjected. And then the rabbi takes him to the huge mirror hanging on the wall, and he turns to the man. He says, "And who's that?" And he says, "What do you mean, who's that?" "That's me." He says, "I don't understand. We were looking through the window before, and we saw Yankel, and we saw Getzel, and Shmerel, and Beryl. We saw all those poor people, and now we're looking at the glass, and you say you only see me. Why don't you see other people?" He says, "Rabbi, I thought you were more educated than that. The mirror doesn't have clear glass. It has silver that lines it from behind. And when there's silver behind it, you can't see through it. You only see yourself." "Ah," the rabbi said, "is that so? Is that so? When you have a lot of silver, you only see yourself. You don't see the needs of others." And of course, that changed him and brought him back to his old self. So when you are rich and you have everything that you need, or you think you have everything you need, because you never really have everything you really need, but that's a separate subject, you don't feel the needs of others. So you don't feel poverty, you don't feel the slavery, so you really don't appreciate what freedom means. So how do we start the Seder? We point to the matzah and we say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. We want to identify with that affliction. And therefore, that's why we said, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. That's why we had to make an invitation to the poor, because it's not just a matter of charity. You have to help the poor throughout the year. But in Passover, helping the poor has a different point. The point of helping the poor is that you should feel the poverty yourself. That's a crucial part. And that's why we say now we are slaves, we are here. But next year we will be free. So in order to appreciate the freedom of the future, the redemption, the ultimate redemption, you have to be able to understand what poverty is, what the matzah, the symbol of impoverishment, the symbol of affliction is all about. And that's why it's said in Aramaic, simply because that's the language that people spoke in those days. The common folk understood Aramaic. But there's another reason. The Midrash tells us that Aramaic is the language of wailing. If a person has to say words of lamentations, dirges, the best language for it that expresses pain and suffering is Aramaic. Some people explain that's why the Kaddish was composed in Aramaic. And there are other prayers that are said in Aramaic. It says the angels don't speak Aramaic. Why don't they speak Aramaic? Because it's not a happy language. And angels cannot understand what unhappiness is. They're not human, so they don't have all the reasons to make them unhappy. So Aramaic is the symbol of trying to plug into the feeling of suffering and pain, so that when we do express the feelings of redemption and freedom, it's really appreciated. And that way we will also be able to ask God and say, look, God, look what the suffering is going on in the world. Bring an end to it. Bring us Mashiach, bring us the redemption. That's the first paragraph in the Haggadah. What I want to talk about today primarily is the very end of the Haggadah, which is a hymn, an enigmatic hymn called Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya is printed at the end of many of the Haggadot, the Haggadahs, and it's a hymn. It sounds like it's written for children, and children like it. There's even a melody that people use when they sing Chad Gadya. I'm not going to torture you with singing it. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. That's it. And no one even knows who composed it, when it was composed, What was the idea behind it? It was definitely the first time that it's mentioned is about 600 years ago. And the first editions of it, they were printed in a Haggadah, goes back about 400 or so years. So we're not talking about an ancient prayer. The Haggadah goes back 2,000 years. This goes, or more. This goes back just about 500-600 years. Some people claim that one of the early rabbis in Germany, known as the Rokeach, not to be confused with the food product Rokeach, although I think the name came actually from that person. Some say that he was one of the people who discovered it and interpreted it. It definitely goes back hundreds of years, mostly in places in Ashkenazic communities. And some people would make fun of it, saying it's a childish hymn and it doesn't have any significance. And a very famous Sephardic rabbi, known as the Chidah, writes in his commentary, anyone who claims that it's childish and it shouldn't be said or it should be dismissed as not having any relevance deserves to be excommunicated. Very harsh, even though the Sephardic communities, I don't think, adopted this hymn the way the Ashkenazic did, but everyone felt there was something mysterious about this hymn. One authority says this hymn doesn't have any one meaning. It's whatever, it was written deliberately so that everyone puts their own meaning into it. So that following that, there are probably hundreds of interpretations of this hymn. One rabbi, the Sephardic rabbi mentioned, says that he found a book in which there were one person gave 20 different explanations of it. Let's go through it first, and then we'll try to see some of the explanations. Chad Gadya, one kid. Kid here means literally a young animal. Sometimes translated as a goat, but it doesn't have to be a goat. It could be a lamb, it could be a goat, a small animal, as opposed to a bull, an ox, a cow. Okay, and my father bought for 2 zuzim, and then we repeat again, one little kid. The cat came and ate the kid. And again, which my father bought for 2 zuzim. One little kid. The dog came. I'm not going to read every word here, but what happens over here is the cat eats the kid, the dog bites the cat, the stick hits or beats the dog, the fire comes and burns the stick, the water comes and extinguishes the fire, the ox comes and drinks the water, the slaughterer, the Shochet, comes and kills the ox, the angel of death comes and kills the slaughterer, and then God, the Holy One, blessed be He, smites the angel of death. So what exactly is this hymn all about, and why do we say it at the end of the Seder? What is its significance and what is its relevance to Passover? So I'll share with you two explanations before I share with you some other explanations. One explanation is it's based on a midrash. That when Abraham, the first Jew, recognized that there's one God and rejected idolatry, his father was so upset at him, he took him to Nimrod, the emperor, who was the chief idolater of that time. And Nimrod ordered him to worship an idol. And Abraham said, why should I worship an idol? You know, it's worthless. It's made out of wood. And a fire could come and burn it. Aha, Nimrod said, then worship fire. So Abraham said, why should I worship fire? You pour some water on it and it extinguishes the fire. Oh, then worship water. Why should I worship water when the clouds could carry the water? So worship the clouds. Clouds? The wind could blow the clouds around. So worship the wind. People could withstand the wind. So worship me, because I'm the greatest human being. And of course, Abraham said no, and he was thrown into a fiery furnace, and miraculously he came out unscathed. And that was the beginning of Abraham's career of promoting monotheism to the world. So this midrashic story is about how the concept of monotheism was introduced to the world for the first time in a public way. And that's part of what the Seder of Passover is about. It's not just about freedom from Pharaoh, it's about freedom from Pharaoh's ideology. Pharaoh and the Egyptians were idolaters. That's why we took a paschal lamb. The lamb was one of the deities of Egypt, and we slaughtered that lamb, showing them that there is no other God but our one God. So at the end of the Seder, in a cute way, we also go through the different stages. First you have a little kid, the cat eats the kid, the dog bites the cat. In other words, one after the other shows dominance over the weaker, and ultimately the strongest force is God, and only God has the control over everything. So that's one theory as to what this hymn is about. And I shouldn't say the word theory, because the hymn was written deliberately to contain all these different messages. As long as the message is an appropriate message, then it's something that we should focus on and realize that that's really what the Seder is about. To end up realizing that God is in total control, and all the intermediary levels are just powers that God gives them, but they don't have the ultimate power. That's one approach. Another approach, and this one is sometimes said somewhat in jest, let's try to understand who is righteous here and who is not righteous. The kid is innocent, okay? We have to start with that premise. The poor little lamb is innocent. So the cat is the villain here. Isn't that right? The cat eats the kid. The cat is the villain. Okay, so the dog is righteous because the dog bites the cat that did something wrong. So the stick is the villain again. The fire is righteous. The water is the villain. The ox is righteous. The slaughterer is the villain. The angel of death is righteous. And God is what? It doesn't work. Something is wrong over here. So what mistake did we make in all of this? The mistake was, let's start again. The kid is innocent, righteous. The cat is the villain here. The dog bites the cat. 1 second. Who authorized you to punish the cat? Why are you getting involved? Who gives you, you dog, who gives you the right to take God's justice into your own hands? And that's the response to Pharaoh. The question is asked. Maimonides asked this question, and many others do as well. God promised Abraham that his descendants will be slaves in a foreign land, and they will be persecuted. So why are we punishing Pharaoh? Why did God afflict him with 10 plagues? What did he do wrong? He was executing God's will. God says that these people are going to suffer. So Pharaoh said, okay, I volunteered to do it. Now you're the dog that gets involved when you were not asked to do it. God never told Pharaoh, I want you to punish these people. God has many ways of causing people to suffer if that's what he wants. Anyone who chooses to be God's instrument to harm others is a villain. So the dog is the villain here, not just the cat. That's one approach that goes through all of these different levels to show that ultimately no one has the right to be the messenger of God to harm others unless you have a direct commandment from God. Those are two approaches. And there are many other approaches that try to see the Chad Gadya as a story of all of Jewish history. And they go through, I'm not going to go through these different interpretations, they have variations of this, that each one of these stages is another stage in Jewish history. And if one is looking at Jewish history, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, one could simply look at the penultimate case over here, where the angel of death is the one who kills the slaughterer. The angel of death in history, we could say, was the Holocaust. That was when the forces of evil, of destruction, were unleashed in an unprecedented manner. But they were not going to succeed. God is the one who ultimately prevails. But now I want to share with you two other interpretations. One that I found just last night in a magazine. It was published about 40 or so years ago. And it's written by someone, not a real relative, like it's my sister-in-law's father. So I guess that's called a mechutin in Yiddish. And he takes an approach, what you would call, based on the Mussar approach. Next, after Passover, we're going to be having a course about the differences between the Mussar approach and the Hasidic approach. And they're both valid approaches, but one focuses primarily on having to deal with negativity, and one focuses on positive energy primarily, although they overlap, of course. So his is more of, even though he's a Hasidic, he passed away a few years ago, he was a Hasidic author, he uses more of a Mussar approach. And he says like this is how he translates it. The article is written in Yiddish, so I'm not going to say it in Yiddish. Okay, one little kid. Kid over here, he means literally a child, not an animal. We're talking about a child, an innocent child. An innocent child that the father sold. The Aramaic word here, the zavan, could mean buy or sell. It could be translated either way. So he takes it as God takes the little kid, the soul of a little kid, and he puts it into a body for 2 zuzim. What does the word zuz mean? It's a coin. But the root of that word actually means movement. God gives the child 2 directions in which to move. You can move in the direction of the positive, or you can move in the direction of the negative. A human being is endowed with both inclinations. So yes, it's an innocent child, but the potential for that child is to go 2 different ways, 2 movements. Then the cat comes. The child gets a little older and develops nails or claws. And the child might be a cute little cat. You know, cats are very cute, but they're also pretty, if anyone owns cats over here, you tell me. But they also know how to, really irritate you sometimes. And the child becomes like a little monster, like a little tiger. And then we say, oh, one kid, if only the kid was as innocent as he was when I was holding him in my bosom. The child is becoming a little bit of a terrible twos, Then the dog comes. That's another stage. That's a little worse. The cat is still, a domestic animal. It stays at home. It doesn't really attack people. The dog starts to wander outside. Not only does it have nails, but it has teeth and a tongue. And the kid becomes full of chutzpah. Like the dog has a lot of chutzpah. The Talmud says that a dog is known for its chutzpah. It'll bark at anyone. No matter how big the person is, the tiny little dog will just bark at you thinking that he owns the world and who are you to trespass. And that's what happens to the child. The next stage, the child turns from a little cat into someone who can bark and really act in a very negative way. But then comes the stick. This is a little adolescence. And the stick is independent. It's detached from the tree. And it's hard. It doesn't look with favor at its parents. It looks at the parents as, you're some Neanderthals, what do you know about anything? Parents are the most foolish people on earth. Mark Twain's remark, how his parents became so much more intelligent in the 5 years from when he was 15 till he became 20. They became so much more intelligent. It's a very negative, hard view of your elders. And then the fire comes. That's when the passions start to develop, the hormones, the passions, and it just, it completely transforms the person into a hedonistic creature. But then the water comes. Water is a symbol. Water cools off things. You get a little older, the ardor, the passion, the desires become a lot more muted and subdued. Water can sometimes be the symbol of knowledge. You become a little smarter. You see all the disappointments in life. You see that life isn't what you thought it was when you were a teenager or a young person, young, newly married, or whatever it is. And the water extinguishes the fire, but that's only a temporary thing, because what happens afterwards is the ox comes. Even people who are older and smarter and more intelligent become like oxen with horns to gore, get into competition, get into struggles and fights with others to the point where they become very destructive. They're older, they're adults now, they no longer have the same youthful passion, but they become goring oxes or oxen. And then the angel of death, the Shochet rather, comes and slaughters the ox. When the person is able to overcome his animal nature, but he can never be free of the struggle. You get older, you think you overcome the struggle. The truth is that you never know how you're going to end up until the person is no longer here. The angel of death is the only way. If you live a righteous life until the last breath, you know you were a righteous person. You should never trust in yourself until the day you die. But ultimately, God will prevail and take us out of all of this negativity in our lives and bring us to a time when everything will be positive. That, I abridged what he says over here. It's a very lengthy article. But I want to share with you an original interpretation of Chad Gadya that uses a more Hasidic and more positive way of looking at things, because according to that interpretation, the whole Chad Gadya is a very depressing one about how we become cats with dogs, sticks, and everything else negative, except at the very end, everything turns out to be positive. Chad Gadya, one kid. Some of what I'm saying is based on other interpretations. I'm just weaving it together a little differently. One kid references the Jewish people. The Jewish people are considered to be a lamb. There's a biblical verse in the book of Jeremiah, Zeh Pizura Yisrael. We are a scattered lamb, scattered all over the world. The Midrash says we're like one sheep surrounded by 70 wolves. All the nations of the world were surrounding us throughout history, trying to devour us and destroy us. Just go to the UN and you still see an echo of that. Thank God it's only concentrated in one very horrible place. But the rest of the world is no longer in that mode of trying to destroy us, just the people around Israel. But that is the definition of the Jewish people. We are one little lamb. Why is it repeated? One kid. Because in the Torah, when something is repeated, it's a symbol of affection. When God speaks to Abraham, he says, Avraham, Abraham. And Rashi explains, why does he repeat the word Abraham? Because it's a sign of affection. When you love someone, you call their name twice. At least in biblical times, that was the custom. So we say here, one kid. We're talking affectionately, God is talking affectionately about his people. They are one little sheep, one little lamb that our Father purchased. We're going to follow the classical translation that it's he purchased, not he sold, but he purchased. God purchased us. He acquired us as his people, bitrei zuzi, with two zuzi. What does that mean, with two zuzi? So, the Torah is, what? The two tablets, very good. The Torah that was given to us at Mount Sinai contains two tablets. And that's how God acquired us, because we accepted the Torah. In the Ethics of the Fathers, it says there are things that God acquires. God is also into acquisition. And one of the things he acquired was Israel, the Jewish people. And it's actually a biblical verse in the song that we say when we refer to the crossing of the Red Sea. Am zu kanisa, this nation you have acquired. So how do you acquire something? If God acquired us, we had to pay for it. We had to do something. What did we do to be acquired by God? We accepted the 2 tablets. Another interpretation, the Torah itself is divided into two different dimensions. There is the written Torah and there's the oral Torah. The written Torah is the biblical body of literature, and the oral Torah are the interpretations of it that were passed down, and these are the discussions of the rabbis throughout all of history are based on the oral tradition, and we accepted both, the written and the oral. So that's how we became gods, by accepting the Torah. Another dimension, another interpretation, the Torah is divided into the external and also the internal, the body and the soul of the Torah, the laws of the Torah and the spiritual meanings of the Torah, the mystical dimension of the Torah. By accepting all these twin dimensions of Torah, that's how we became God's acquisition. One more level. When we were given the option of accepting the Torah, we didn't say, let's hear what's in it, and then we'll see if we want to accept it. We said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do it, and then we'll hear what it's about. And because of that, we were rewarded. God gave us 2 crowns because we said we will do it before we even knew what it was about. And it's interesting that in the Talmud tells a story of a rabbi whose name was Rava, was studying, and somehow his finger was lodged in the wrong place, and it started to bleed. And he was oblivious to it. And there was a heretic there, a Sadducee. And he looks at the rabbi and he says, you Jews are all the same. You're such an impulsive people, such an irrational people. You, at Mount Sinai, said, we will do it before you even knew what it was about. And you're just the same thing. You're studying, oblivious to what's going on with your finger. In other words, you're so impulsive, so rash, so irrational. And the word he used to describe the Jews, this anti-Semitic heretic, was Amma Peziza, an impulsive nation. The word Peziza has the same root as the word Zuzi, which usually means 2 coins. So the Peziza over here means, the 2 Zuzi could mean, we are an impulsive nation because we said we will do it before we said we will hear it. And then we say, Chad Gadya, we are one kid, one lamb or one young animal, whatever it is. But why the emphasis on one here? Because the Torah describes the Jewish people the same way it describes God. God is one, and Israel is one. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, the prophet says, who is like your nation Israel? Goy echad ba'aretz, one nation on earth. By the way, just parenthetically, when a Jew speaks about Gentiles, the term used usually is goyim, or a goy. And people think it's a pejorative. It's not. It's used for the Jewish people. Goy means nation. Goyim is plural. So when you're talking about the Jew, a Jew is a member of the goy, of the nation. The Gentiles are goyim, are part of the many nations. So it is absolutely not pejorative at all. It just describes the various nations of the world. At any rate, we are goy echad. We are one nation on earth. And then there is another, we say Chad Gadya twice, because Jewish oneness has 2 different levels as well. One level of our oneness is that we are a unique nation. And no one could deny that. We don't have people who will have ambivalent attitudes towards Jews. Either Jews are special or they're terrible. Nothing in between. So we are a unique nation. We stand apart from all nations of the world. Even when Jews try to assimilate, we discover that the anti-Semites of the world don't allow us to do it. So we are one nation. But then there's a deeper level of oneness. This is the Hasidic interpretation. Goy, a nation, echad, that introduces the oneness of God, ba'aretz, on this earth. That our function in this world is not to promote ourselves, but to promote God's unity, God's oneness, just as Abraham did. So Chad Gadya, this one little kid, this Jewish people, we have two dimensions of oneness. Number one, we're unique amongst nations, and we are obsessed with the idea of God's oneness. You know the joke they tell about the kid who was sent by his atheist father to a Catholic school because it had a better curriculum, and he comes home after a few weeks talking about the Trinity. So the father calls him aside and he said, "My son, I want you to know, you're a Jew. There's only one God, and we don't believe in him." So even the atheist will swear by one God. That's so ingrained in the Jewish people, more than any other belief. The oneness. So that's what Chad Gadya. Chad means one. We are a one nation, and we are a nation of oneness, of introducing oneness to the world. Okay, so we got through that we are one nation, that God acquired us with these two different types of Torah, levels of Torah, different modes of expression. Whatever it is that we did, God acquired us. And now comes the cat. And this is a positive thing. It says in the Talmud, there's a whole section of the Talmud about dream interpretation. If you dream that you saw a cat in your dream, what does that mean? Now, if you have a cat in your house that's driving you crazy and you dream about a cat, don't attach any importance to it. You're just dreaming what you're thinking of all day long. But if I would dream about a cat, and I never owned a cat, then it would mean something. What does it mean? It means Shira No'eh. You will hear a beautiful song. Because the Aramaic word for cat is shunra. Shunra is a composite of two words, Shira No'eh. If you say it fast, Shira No'eh sounds like shunra. So the Talmud says that dreaming about a cat means that you will be singing a beautiful song. Now, what does that have to do with Passover? The whole idea of Passover is about singing a beautiful song, singing praise to God. And that the reason why the Jewish people deserve to be redeemed is because they sang praise to God. When they crossed the sea, they sang, Oz Yashir, then Moses sang. And then it says the women, Miriam led the women in song. But there's a little difference. Miriam and the women were using their instruments. What instrument were they using? Tambourines. And they were dancing. Well, where do they get the tambourines from? So the Midrash tells us that the women were preparing to celebrate even before they were freed. They were already in the mode of singing and celebrating because, as one of the great Kabbalists of the 17th century, known as the Sholah, explains, that when a Jew praises God before the miracle, celebrating the miracle, that's the greatest sign of faith, of course, and that's the merit through which you deserve to be liberated. So it was the women's rejoicing even before the miracle, evidenced by the fact that they already had all the instruments ready. That was the merit through which they were redeemed. The Talmud says something about one of the greatest Jewish leaders of all times who failed in one regard. King Hezekiah, Chezkiyahu, was the most righteous of kings. So righteous was he that God said, I want him to be the Mashiach. I want him to be the final leader of the Jewish people that will usher in the ultimate redemption. But he blew it. What did he do wrong? When he experienced a miracle, the Assyrian army was besieging Jerusalem, and miraculously they were all defeated without even shooting one arrow. He didn't sing praise. He took it for granted. Yeah, of course God could do it. No big deal. He says because he didn't sing praise, he couldn't be the Redeemer. So redemption is associated with not only singing praise, but even anticipating it before it's happening to rejoice. There's a story that I'll share with you, a story that's been publicized. I know the people who were involved with the story, but it's a story that happened in Toronto some 60 plus years ago, when a young little baby, a 2-year-old or 1.5-year-old baby, fell into a tub of boiling water, and the doctors gave up totally and said there was no chance of her surviving. And the father, who was a rabbi, had a connection to the Rebbe's secretary, who was a rabbi, and it was the middle of the night, I think, and he called him to get the Rebbe's blessing, and the Rebbe said that on Shabbos, the coming Shabbos, they should throw a huge kiddush, a huge party in the synagogue, and celebrate. And he thought, the doctors don't even give her an hour. So the Rebbe's secretary says, then why are you calling? Why are you calling if you don't believe in this? And he had that kiddush, and needless to say, the child survived. The child is now a principal of a school. She's about 65 years old or older in California. But the Rebbe said that the celebration should take place before the miracle even. And that's what brings the miracle. The joy, the beautiful song is how we get redemption. So that's the first thing, the shunra, the cat. Another thing about a cat, the Talmud says that if not for the fact the Torah was given to us and we know what's right and what's wrong, if, hypothetically speaking, if there had not been a Torah, and I guess for people who are not aware of the Torah, how are they supposed to learn morality and ethics? And the Talmud says, learn it from animals. Look for the way animals behave. Of course, you have to discriminate. Some animals like to eat you alive, and some will do you the favor and kill you before they eat you. But you can't just learn from every animal, but you can see certain things about animals that are what we would call in Yiddish menschlich, really decent human traits. And one of the things it says, learn modesty from a cat. Now, I don't have a cat, so I can just tell you what the Talmud says, but apparently the cat has a certain degree of modesty that other animals don't have. So this is again what is being hinted over here, that what is it that helps bring redemption? Redemption is through the joy, the celebration, and also through modesty. Because one really could affect, one tempers the other. When a person is very expressive with joy, they lose their inhibitions, and that could affect their modesty. So the cat, while on one hand it's the beautiful song, it tempers it with its modesty. And modesty is a term that's a broad term that means modesty in terms of your clothing, the way you dress, the way you act, the way you behave. And then we go to the next level. So the cat eats the kid. What does it mean that it eats the kid? It doesn't mean it devours the kid. It means that it envelops the Jew. The Jew is enveloped with this beautiful song, with this spirit of modesty. And then comes the dog who bites the cat. Biting, by the way, the Hebrew word or Aramaic word for biting, nashach, in Talmudic jargon also means to touch. If you have two pieces of dough and you want to make them into one batter for legal purposes of separating challah, the term using is nashach. They bite each other, they touch each other. So the next stage is you can't just have a beautiful song and be modest. You have to be like a dog. And the Talmud says that amongst nations, which people have the most chutzpah? Raise your hands. We, the Jewish people, have the most chutzpah of all nations. And amongst animals, which creature has the most chutzpah? The dog. So there's something positive about chutzpah. Chutzpah could be negative as well, of course. In the Mussar approach, chutzpah is the way the teenage child talks back to his parents. That's chutzpah. That's an improper type of chutzpah. But there's a positive chutzpah. The positive chutzpah is where we stand up to God and we say to God, God, how much longer do you want us to suffer? Where's justice? Abraham uses chutzpah when he speaks to God. Abraham says to God, are you the judge of the whole earth? What, will you not do justice? Choni Hamagel is the circle drawer, the story in the Talmud when there was a drought. I think I told the story recently. I don't remember if this is this class or some other class. But he drew a circle around himself because there was a drought. And he says to God, God, I will refuse to leave this circle until you bring the rain. I know a lot of people can draw a lot of circles and the rain won't come. But he had chutzpah. And then when the rain started coming in droplets, he says to God, God, that's useless. We want real rain. So it came down in torrents. And he says, God, you want to destroy us? And then the rain came down in a measured way. And one of the leading rabbi of his time said to him, you know what, if you were not like a spoiled child in God's eyes, I would have excommunicated you for your brazenness, for your chutzpah. And the lesson from this is that while we shouldn't draw circles around ourselves and refuse to leave until we get what we want, we have a right to use some holy chutzpah in reference to God. We could be like a dog, the positive aspect of the dog, in talking about redemption, because that's what the whole Seder is about. The Seder is not just remembering an ancient event of the past. Forget it, it's 3,000 years ago. Why are we still focused on something that happened 3,300 years ago? Because we're not. We're focused on the here and now and on the future. We want that all of the suffering and pain in the world should end. And we want the beginning of a new age, of a true age of redemption. And for that we're saying we need the Shira Noah, we need the beautiful song, and we also need the chutzpah. We also need to be able to stand up. And if you look at all the greatest Jewish leaders, they all had this chutzpah. And in fact, the Jewish people as a whole, if we wouldn't have the chutzpah to survive when everyone wanted us to go under, we wouldn't be here today. Sometimes chutzpah could cause us problems. But the Talmud says before the Messianic age, one of the signs that you know that the Mashiach is about to come is there'll be a lot of chutzpah, which is both positive and negative. There's a negative form of it, but because it's a neutral trait, it could be used for the positive. Okay, so we know what the dog is, and now we're ready for the stick. The Aramaic word for stick here is chutra. Chutra is a term that is used biblically in a Hebrew form of it, choter, as a reference to the Mashiach. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 11, you know, everything about Mashiach in Jewish sources is chapter 11. In the Bible, Isaiah chapter 11. In the Talmud, it's Sanhedrin chapter 11. In Maimonides' writings, it's whatever section it is, chapter 11. It reminds me of the story of the guy who comes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says to him, what's troubling you? He says, my business is really horrible. What should I do? He says, open the Torah, and you'll get the answer. Next week he comes back with a big smile on his face. He said, what did you do to make your business better? He said, I listened to you. I opened the Torah. And what did you find there? The rabbi, not even believing his own advice, he said, I opened it up and it was chapter 11. So I declared bankruptcy and now I'm doing better. Well, in a certain sense, the Messianic age is what bankrupts all of the suffering and the pain of the past. No more suffering and pain. We're bankrupted evil, and now it's only going to be good. So where do we read about Mashiach? In Isaiah chapter 11, and how does it begin? It begins with the words, and a choter will emerge from the seed or the branch of Yishai, Jesse, the King David's father, reference to Mashiach, and he will be the great leader, and so on and so forth. So the Hebrew word over there is a shoot or a branch or a stick. So the next stage is the stick. But why are we using a word stick to allude to Mashiach, a positive, a redeemer, a human redeemer. So there are two reasons. The first, the negative, and then the positive. In the negative sense, there are certain people that have latent spiritual and positive qualities, but somehow something doesn't allow them to express it. They need to be jolted. And when they're jolted, the good comes out. That's a last resort. That's not the standard approach to helping someone by using the stick. But there are some cases where there is no other choice. There's a story of a great rabbi who someone came to him for advice about he needed some rehabilitation. And the rabbi said to him, "I can't help you." And the man left, and he sat down crying, because that was his last hope, that this rabbi, who was known for his brilliance and his sage advice and his ability to empathize and counsel people, and here your last resort says, "I can't help you, you're so far gone, I really can't help you." He just broke down crying. Well, this rabbi had an older brother who was also a great rabbi, who was not too far away, and he sees this man crying bitterly. He says, "What's wrong?" He says, "My last hope was dashed. I came to your brother and asked him for advice, and he said he couldn't help me, that I'm a lost cause." Well, the older brother was a little bit upset at his younger brother, because he knew him as a very sensitive, empathetic, sweet, warm, kind, compassionate person. So he says, "How could you be so cruel to tell a man that he's hopeless? You have to help him." So the rabbi, younger brother, says to him, "Okay, tell him to come in again." And he comes in again, and he gives him advice, and he helps him. So later on he explained that was all deliberate. That was not, he saw that this man was so far gone, was so troubled, that he could not help him the way he was then. He had to break down. As painful as it was to cause him to cry that bitterly, he knew that was the only thing. He had to give him the stick, because he was so far gone that the only thing that could open him up and allow the positive energy to come out was to know that he was a lost cause. And then, once he knew that, once he broke down, he was able to help him. I told you the story, I think, this class years ago, a story that happened with my brother, with one of his students. It was before, it was Rosh Hashanah, and there's a tradition that in the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, there's so much holiness in the air that it's only natural for a person to cry at a certain point. Your heart is opened up, and if you're aware of what's going on, your emotions will come out. And if you don't, it's a sign that something is defective in your soul. Well, one of my brother's students came over to him after Rosh Hashanah services, and he says, "You know what? I'm so hard, it didn't move me. Rosh Hashanah didn't move me. The shofar sounding didn't open up my emotions. Does that mean I have a defective soul?" And my brother said, "No, it doesn't prove anything. You have 10 days. Day one has gone by, you have 9 more days." Well, to make a long story short, it's now Yom Kippur, the 10th day, after Kol Nidre, and he says to my brother, nothing happened. I'm just as hard and incapable of expressing my feelings. Well, you have 4 more prayers to go on Yom Kippur. Well, they get to the last prayer before the Ne'ilah, the final prayer when your essence of your soul is supposed to be revealed. And he says, nothing has worked. And he says, wait till after the prayer is over. They say the Shema, and everyone shouts the Shema. There's such fervor, there's such emotion. And after the whole service is over, it's now over. He goes over to my brother, it didn't work. So my brother looks at him and says, "You have a defective soul." And he broke down crying. That is the stick, that sometimes a negative experience in a person's life We should never wish for anything negative. I said this dozens of times in classes. No one should ever look for anything negative for any reason. But once it happens, recognize that that might be a blessing in disguise. It was intended to open up certain, I don't know if it was intended, but it does have that fringe benefit, let's put it that way, that it'll open up the wells of feeling and emotion. And don't waste it. It already happened. Take advantage of it. That's the stick that helps prepare us for the redemption, bringing out the good in us. But there's also a positive thing about a stick. The Midrash tells us that if you take a stick, you throw it up into the air, it lands on its base. It's not clear what that means. One interpretation says it's like a boomerang, that if you throw a boomerang, it comes right back to you. Some say it means that the branch will land on the place where it's attached to the tree. Whatever it is, it's a metaphor, it's a folk saying. What is the folk saying telling you? That eventually, even the most estranged, alienated Jew will come back to its roots, to your roots, to our roots. Everyone will come back. Nobody will be lost. There's an expression, biblical expression, no one will be cast away forever. No Jew, the Rebbe would always say, will be left behind from this exile. When the Jews came out of Egypt, not all Jews were liberated. There was a whole group of Jews who said, we like it here in Egypt, slavery or no slavery, this is our home. We want to stay. And God says, you'll get your wish. And they died out. And they didn't leave Egypt. But this exile, the Rebbe would always emphasize, is different. No Jew will be left behind. Everyone will return to his or her source. At the Seder, remember the wicked son? And we're very harsh to the wicked son. We say, if you would have been there, you would not have been redeemed. Is that the way to try to get a rebellious child comes to the Seder? You should be nice to him. Why are you so harsh to the rebellious son? At least he comes to the Seder. So the Rebbe would explain that you have to read the words right. Not, if you were there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. No. If you would have been there, you wouldn't have been redeemed. But now you will. There was a time when we weren't yet a nation. If you chose not to enter into the fold, you got your wish. But today, by hook or by crook, you are a Jew, you will remain a Jew, and you will come back to the fold. You will recognize who you really are, and you will be redeemed. So why fight it? If you're going to be part of this, why fight it now? This is who you are. This is what defines you. So the stick is the symbol of returning to your roots. And what does it say in the very last prophecy of the last biblical prophet, Malachi? The very end says that before the Messianic age, Elijah the prophet will come, and he will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children and the children to the fathers. He will bring the Jewish people back to their fold. And sometimes it comes from the fathers to the children. The parents are able to get the children to come back. And sometimes it's the children who get the parents. Works both ways. So what will bring us to redemption? The stick. Yes, sometimes it might be harsh, but the stick ultimately symbolizes that we will all be redeemed. And then the fire comes. Some people still have the question, how do we consider ourselves as a people and as individuals worthy of the redemption? How do we consider ourselves worthy? I mean, everyone knows their limits, their shortcomings, their defects. There are some imperfections in us, if we put it mildly, and sometimes it's worse than just imperfections. So how do we explain our worthiness of being redeemed? And the answer is the fire. The Talmud tells a story. A heretic challenged a rabbi. He says, if you look at biblical texts, it seems that God was a Kohen. God is a priest. Of course, metaphorically speaking. And a priest is not allowed to get in touch with a dead body. And yet it says that God buried Moses. How did God bury Moses? How did he purify himself? And the rabbi answered, he purified himself with fire. The ultimate mikveh, the ultimate purifying agent is fire. We can't go into a mikveh of fire, obviously, so we use water as a substitute. But the ultimate purification is fire. If we go through Jewish history, the Jewish people have been immersed in the mikveh of fire countless times, up until, and not limited to, the Holocaust. Literally, not just figuratively. If the Jewish people could ever be faulted for anything, and we're not perfect, and no one claims to be perfect, we have been immersed and purified and cleansed in that fire over and over and over again. So if anyone says, and sometimes you hear Jewish people saying, oh, we're not worthy of the Mashiach, we're not worthy of redemption. What are you talking about? We're not worthy? Maybe as an individual we have some imperfections, but as a people we are worthy of worthy, considering the fact that we had to go through this fire. So fire is the purification process, the ultimate purification process. But then, that's not the way we want to earn the redemption. Then comes the water. Water is the metaphor in the Torah itself for study of Torah. Yes, if you want to be cleansed, in preparation for the Messianic age, we want to be cleansed, and fire does cleanse, but we'd rather be cleansed through water. If you have a choice of learning a good lesson through failure, the teacher tells you, I'm going to teach you a lesson. You're going to go out and you have two choices. One, choice A is guaranteed to fail. You're going to be miserable. But in the end, you will learn a very invaluable lesson. The other approach is through study, through reflection, through meditation. And that will teach you the lesson. Which should you choose if you're normal? A normal person is obligated to choose the easier path, the water, not the fire. God gives us enough fire. We don't have to ask for it. There are enough incidents in life, enough experiences in life where we are subjected to the fire to learn invaluable lessons, that we don't have to look for the fire. We should look for the water. How do we cleanse our minds? How do we change and reorient the way we think? Because what's really our problem? Ultimately, it's all in the head. Everything is in the head. It's the way we think about things. Why do people commit crimes? It's because the way they think about who they are, what their purpose in life is, or lack of purpose, and how they look at others, and so on and so forth. It's changing the way we think. And how do you change the way you think? It's through using the mind in the right way. But you can study any subject that tells you what's right or what's wrong. Torah is divine wisdom, and divine wisdom has the ability to reshape and reorient the way you think. So then, yes, we want to prepare for redemption, for going out of our own Egypt. Fire has done wonders for us in cleansing us and preparing us. But the approach that we should take is the approach of water. But then the ox comes. The ox, this is what some commentaries say, and I'll take it and then build on it. In the Talmud, we're told that the Messianic age is ushered in by a human being, a person called, that we refer to as the Mashiach. But there are two. According to the Kabbalah, there are really one person who has two stages. One is called Mashiach ben Yosef, the Mashiach, the descendant of Joseph. Joseph is likened to an ox in Genesis, in Deuteronomy. This Mashiach is the one who fights the battles against evil and eventually succumbs in battle, is killed in battle. That means the first stage is fighting evil. The next stage is ushering in the good, not dealing with evil anymore. That's the second Mashiach, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach, the descendant of King David. Again, it could be the same person, but two different stages. One is getting rid of the evil, focusing on the evil, getting rid of every last vestige of it, and then focusing on the good. So the next step, after we've already gone through all these different steps, the beautiful song, the chutzpah, the staff, the fire, the purification through fire and then water, then comes the force that ultimately deals with evil. On another level, related to this, the ox in the olden days was the symbol of material wealth. How did you show your material wealth? It depends how many oxen you had, because the ox was the plow that produced the vegetation, all the food. If you owned 1,000 oxen, you were a rich man. That is the symbol of your material value, the physical part of you. And that is the next stage, that we have to not just deal with our spirituality, but we have to start to affect our material existence as well. The ox, the animal, has to also be harnessed in order to produce positive results. Because a human being, as sophisticated as we are, we don't have quite the same power that an animal has. An ox, to be specific. Never get into a wrestling match with an ox. So what does that mean spiritually? Our godly soul is very passionate about God, but when the animal soul joins the godly soul, the passion is even greater, because the animal soul has more energy than the godly soul, and therefore you want to have that ox also involved. The Messianic age is not just about spirituality, it's about harnessing everything to get us closer to God. Then the Shochet comes. The Shochet has a negative connotation of someone, a slaughterer. The Talmud says the word for slaughtering doesn't really mean slaughtering. Hebrew is such a refined language that it doesn't have negative words. Every negative word is a euphemism. And shchita, which sounds like slaughtering, in English, that's a horrible word. It even has a GH in it. It's a real guttural sound. In Hebrew, shachat means to pull something up, draw something from a lower level to a higher level. It really describes the motion of the knife that is used to kill the animal, that it has to be a smooth pulling movement. But it also has a spiritual connotation of going up to a higher level. This is the second stage of the Messianic age. The Mashiach ben David, who's not focusing on the evil anymore. He's not dealing with the animal anymore. He's dealing with elevating us, bringing us to a higher level. Then the angel of death comes. He's really bad, no? Not necessarily. Not the way Hasidus looks at it. Totally different way of looking at it. By the way, they tell the story that when God created the angel of death, he complained to God. He says, God, I'm going to be so hated, so reviled. I'm going to get the worst publicity. Everyone's going to hate me. You're giving me such a horrible job. And God says, don't worry. I promise you, no one will ever blame you for death. They'll say it's a heart attack, a stroke, it's this illness, that illness. No one is ever going to blame the angel of death. But the angel of death, there's a famous midrash that says God saw that everything was good, very good. That refers to the angel of death. What does that mean? That means that the ultimate goal of the Messianic age is that the forces of negativity, the worst negative forces, will be transformed into positive. When something is positive and becomes more positive, that's great. But when something is the ultimate in the negative and that becomes transformed, that is the greatest. And that's the level that will come in the later stages of the Messianic age. First, in the first stage will be peace in the world. People will get along with each other. There will be no more anti-Semitism, no more hatred, no more bigotry, and so on. The temple will be rebuilt. People will become more spiritual. But eventually, even the evil will be transformed. The angel of death will become the angel of life. And then, the next stage will be that God will get rid of the angel of death. The whole concept of negativity and evil will no longer exist. That's the ultimate goal. But it all begins with, we are one nation on earth. We have one goal, one function, that we, as a result of our acceptance of the Torah, we're acquired by God. And if we go through all the different stages, we apply the beautiful song, the chutzpah, the tenacity, the stick, going back to our roots, the cleansing through fire, through the study of Torah, which is likened to water, affecting the animal within us, ultimately elevating the world, transforming negative into positive until there's no more negative. That is the final hymn of the Seder, which prepares us, it takes us and makes the transition from the story of the past to the story of the future. Any questions? That's just one way of explaining Chad Gadya, one out of probably hundreds of ways. But the main point is that everyone should, whatever you read in the Haggadah, you have to get something out for yourself. But since this hymn is so enigmatic and it was never told by its author what it had in mind, it certainly means that we should reach into it and try to find meaning for ourselves.
When was it first introduced?
The first time it was printed was about 400 years ago, but it's mentioned in a responsum of a rabbi who lived about 600 years ago. So in other words, it was around before him. It's not mentioned by anyone else before that. So we assume that it's around about 700-800 years. That's my guess. Some say it goes back about 800 years, but not more than that.